Hello, everyone. I'm Randall Carlson. I'm here in the studio with a special guest. We've been hanging out together this weekend. We did a little excursion this afternoon to go visit some of the Georgia Indian mounds, and that was quite interesting. And it was the first time that my guest has seen that particular set of Indian mounds. So we may talk about that briefly, but that's not our main focus of this conversation. My guest, Christian Rasmussen, has launched a company, and I believe, well, I don't know, we'll find out from him, but I don't know of anyone else who's doing what he's doing. I think it's what he's doing is very unique, very valuable, very important, and I think this conversation is going to be really interesting. So hang around and let's see what we've got to talk about here. So I would like to introduce Christian Rasmussen. He's here right there in the studio with me. Hi, Christian.
Right here. Thank you, Randall. Yeah, it's been such a fun weekend, man.
It has been a fun weekend. We went out today to the Etowah Indian Mounds. Mm-hmm. It was pretty warm out there.
It was warm. We got a little breeze, though, and a little bit of rain, which cooled it down a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So the Etowah Indian Mounds is right about an hour north of Atlanta, Georgia. It's a beautiful pastoral site right on the Etowah River. And it was built on the floodplain. It was inhabited by, it was a village surrounding a monumental earthwork complex. The village, I believe, held about perhaps as many as 1,000 people.
I think that's what it said, yeah.
Yeah, I think about 1,000 people. The date generally given for it's about 1,000 years ago. I wouldn't be surprised, though, if the mounds were older, because the 1,000 years is the date that I think more or less applies to when the occupancy was occurring, but not necessarily when the mounds themselves were built.
Sure. Yeah.
And we are finding out, we even talked to the site manager, and he did make the offhand comment that everything keeps getting older and older. Mm-hmm. I immediately thought of Graham Hancock, who says the same thing.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. So what we're going to be talking about is mushrooms. But not, when you say mushrooms, there could be a lot of things that conjures up in people's minds, but we're going to be talking specifically about Amanita mushrooms.
Yeah, and right? Amanita Muscaria, to be specific.
Amanita Muscaria,
yeah.
To be more precise. Yes, and I know I'm going to learn a lot. I've already learned a lot, and I've had I've done a little testing on myself at this point, and so far I like what I've experienced. We can talk about the specific physiological or emotional or psychological effects of the different products you've developed.
Yeah.
Now, why don't we start by you just describing how you came to this, what your initial inspiration was, because that to me was a very interesting story, how you found your way into this realm.
Yeah,
of the mushrooms.
Of course, yeah. I mean, it's a really profound story. It was never something that I was striving for or hoping to do with my life. I've always had the feeling that I meant to have an impact on the world, whatever that may end up being. But mm-hmm. I never thought it would be through mushrooms. But so I was, through my 20s, I was in real estate. Well, I went to school for physics for a couple years right after the 2008 housing crisis happened, and
mm-hmm.
and I ended up dropping out and getting into real estate, and I was flipping homes and amassing rental properties and helping investors build up the rental portaffolio, and it was cool, it was fun, it was a dopamine hit, it wasn't a really rewarding thing for me, but it sufficed for that time. But throughout that period I was also getting heavy into drug addiction, which is something that I struggled with since I was 12 or 13, kind of maybe always trying to run away from pain, we'll say. I think that's generally the consensus often with drug addiction. And I was very successful. I was good at what I did throughout my 20s until it kind of all started to fall apart. And at 29, so this was 2019, I made the decision that I was going to die, or at the very least I wasn't going to be able to accomplish what I'm here on earth to do, and that was enough for me to want to get off everything. So I was on predominantly opioids and benzodiazepines. So benzodiazepines, for those that don't know, are typical anti-anxiety medications like Xanax, Klonopin, Ativan, Valium. And they're notoriously known as the worst drugs in the world to get off of. And so, like, I kicked opioids. Difficult, not that hard. I had heard that benzos were the worst to get off of. It's not that I, like, shrugged it off, but I had no idea what I was getting into. And they're so bad because they damage your GABA system and your glutamate system, which take a long time to recover. So
Okay, they damage which system?
the GABAergic system and then the glutamate system.
The glutamate system. Okay.
Yeah. So it's the glutamate's your excitatory system, and the GABA system is your inhibitory system, and they're correlated. So when one has more GABA, more inhibitory neurotransmitters, their glutamate is reduced, less excitatory. And if they have, less GABA, their glutamate is increased, so they're more excitatory. So when you get off benzos, like, your GABA has been artificially raised for so long that it's it's downregulated. You don't produce enough GABA, and so glutamate goes through the roof. So your excitatory neurotransmitters go through the roof. So essentially, it was like living in a panic attack times 10, 24/7. It's awful. It's awful. I have, and it's so bad because it lasts for so long for a lot of people. Not for everybody, but for some people it'll last 10 plus years. I have a cousin who produced the film Medicating Normal, which is on Gaia, actually. And her business partner has been, at least last I heard, she was off of benzos for 9 years or so, and she was still struggling, like, really intensely.
No kidding.
Yeah, it can be brutal.
Wow.
And it's not like that for everybody, but a good amount of people have to deal with this, what they call protracted withdrawal. Although it's technically not even withdrawal at this point, it's brain damage. You're dealing with the damaged GABA and glutamate system, and they take a long time to recover. So I was in this, hell for a year, and, like, couldn't sleep. I wouldn't sleep for months at a time. I couldn't eat. I was like 150 pounds at 6'4", and I was I felt like everybody was out to get me constantly, and the slightest thing would trigger a panic attack. And throughout this process, I had the overambitious. I've always been entrepreneurial, so I had the overambitious idea to start a cannabis company at the beginning of my benzo withdrawal, which I did. It was a lot. It was fun trying to build, like, a website, and one little thing going wrong, I would send me into a full blown panic. So it took a long time to get going, but anyways, so I was building up this company and dealing with these issues, and it was a year into it. It was actually a year to the day. I got off benzos September 16th, 2019. And September 16th, 2020, I was on a hike, and I was really beginning to contemplate ending my life, because it felt like I had healed 5%, maybe, if that, So I was looking at those stories of people dealing with this for 7-10 years. Like, it was looking like that was what I was up against. And I didn't think I could handle it, And so I was on this hike, and I was contemplating all this stuff. And this is in Minnesota. We're both Minnesotans, and this was in right around White Bear Lake, Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
I was hiking around, and I found this patch of mushrooms growing, and they were beautiful. It's the Gasoi variety of Amanita Muscaria, which are orange with white dots instead of the red with white dots, and they're prominent in certain, like, not marshlands, but certain geographies up in Minnesota. And there was this, like, I'd seen them growing there before. I never registered them. I've always studied, pharmacology, plant medicine, so I knew what they were. I'd read a good amount about them, but all the info that I'd read about them were not very positive experiences from people, or people labeling them as toxic and poisonous, which is a myth that's been perpetuated for hundreds of years.
That was my memory of, looking into the Amanita Muscaria years and years ago. That's what I remember most distinctly, was that they were, considered poisonous, and I did not know, but I didn't have access to them.
Yep.
So it was never an issue. Well, I'm probably never going to be doing Amanita Muscaria.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I thought too. I didn't know any better, and we can talk about that myth later on, because it's such an interesting potential story or hypothesis as to why it's been perpetuated for so long. But so there was, like, I saw them growing, and I've always also been very spiritual, so I meditated since I was 13. Even through the midst of my really bad drug addiction, I was reading spiritual texts and practicing meditation, and so I have this intuitive aspect to me, and there was this, like, unbelievable pull towards these mushrooms.
Really,
I liken it to if you meet somebody who's a future partner or a future best friend. Like there's a attraction to that person, you know, it's palpable, you can feel it. And it was like that, but to a degree that I'd never experienced before and haven't experienced since. And so I quieted the mind and dropped in, and I heard loud and clear, we have something for you, and in return you're going to do something for us. I'm like, okay, you know. And so I picked them and I went to the house and I started doing research, and I found they hit the GABA system and the glutamate system, the same systems that benzodiazepines damage. I found all this other info that we were just talking about with people online having really bad experiences, and I now know that it's like people taking basically heroic doses without proper preparation and having really terrible experiences. It's like if you're 16 and you're going to drink for the first time and you just down a fifth of vodka, you know?
That's a very similar story to me when I was 15.
Yeah, for sure. I've been there too. Absolutely. Yeah. And so, I did some more research, and there was one person talking about these positively online, and it was a woman who goes by the pseudonym Amanita Dreamer, and she had just built her YouTube channel maybe a month or two prior to me finding her videos, and I watched her first video, and it was the exact same story as mine. However, she was actually walking gun in hand, suicide note written, you know, to end her life going through benzodiazepine withdrawal when she saw this patch of mushrooms growing, and it had this magnetic pull to her. And so she picked them and did research, and she claimed that utilizing Amanita had healed her brain after getting off benzos or going through benzo withdrawal.
Healed her brain.
Wow. Yeah. So at that point I was desperate, willing to try anything. I had tried everything under the sun to try and get some relief, and nothing really helped, you know. And the first time, I was still being very cautious. So the first time I used them, I used what we call a nano dose, which is a micro dose, right? It's like a tenth of a micro dose. And I brewed it up into a tea and drank it, and it was so interesting because pharmacologically and physiologically, like, it shouldn't have had any effect. There was such a minute amount of actives in there, and you know, placebo, sure, potentially, but I had an immediate relief of my symptoms. Immediate. Like, and it should have taken 20-30 minutes to kick in too, but it didn't. It was nearly immediate. And I had this interesting, like, there's an interesting anecdote from that first experience that kind of like set the tone for some of the work that I was to start doing. I was on the phone with my sister, and she was working at a vineyard in Minnesota, and they'd just gotten a shipment of grapes in from California for the vineyard. And there were a bunch of lizards in these boxes that, you know, from California. And she took one and brought it home and built it a little habitat. And she's telling me this story, and I just blurt out, "Frank?" She goes, "Yeah, how'd you know that I named him Frank?" And I was like, ooh, that, you know, we all get intuitive hits from time to time. Your phone rings, you know who it is before you look at it, you know. But this was a good one, and it showed me, okay, there's something much more here to even what you're noticing and feeling in your body right now, this relief that you're going through.
This was Frank the Lizard?
Frank the Lizard, yeah. Frank the Lizard showed me, you know.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. All right. And so I started using them over the course of 2 weeks. I was microdosing them daily, and I took a couple larger doses in there. Larger being like medium doses, we'll say, and we can get into dosing and all that later. But after the end of the 2 weeks, I stopped, and it felt to me as if I was like 70 to 80% healed. I wasn't just healed while I was using them, it was afterwards too. So it was as if they returned balance and homeostasis to my GABA and glutamate system, you know. And so there's, you know, there seems to be a strong neuroplastic component to these mushrooms. Unfortunately, there's really no data on them as of now. I would hope that can change in the near future. But yeah, so I reached out to this woman that Amanita Dreamer, whom I mentioned earlier, and I wrote her this like 4-page letter expressing my gratitude and explaining that I had this cannabis company that I was building up, and I wanted to sponsor one of her videos, and she, you know, graciously accepted, and I joined this little community of, I don't know, maybe a couple hundred people around the U.S. that were starting to learn about this and use it. And we'd do like monthly meetings or bi-weekly meetings and stuff, and within 6 months, it was May of 2021, somebody asked me in the community if I would start selling the mushrooms, because I have an entrepreneurial background, and everybody was importing them from Russia and Lithuania at that point in time. And so I brought in my first couple kilos from Russia and started off as, you know, just a little ordeal outside of my basement, and one thing led to another, and yeah, here we are. And we've learned, you know, my initial interest was helping people with anxiety and getting off of benzos, but I've learned that the mushroom has a much bigger plan plant than that, and it has a much, much wider scope of efficacy.
Interesting. So, I had kind of forgotten about them. I think, what were the books that covered? We were talking earlier.
Yeah. So the order was the Sacred Mushroom by Andrija Puharic, and then there's Soma, Divine Mushroom of Immortality, and then John Allegro's Sacred Mushroom of the Cross. Those are the three that came out.
Yes, Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, Allegro. That's the one I read many years ago.
Yeah.
And the first one you just mentioned, that one I believe I read too. What did you say?
That one's just called the Sacred Mushroom.
The Sacred Mushroom.
Yeah, the key to the door of eternity or something like that.
Okay, yeah. But I didn't have a source. I just never followed up on it and actually experienced anything having to do with the mushrooms. And then when I was a couple of years ago, 3 years ago maybe, I was researching and I put together a presentation it was focused on the connection between winter solstice and Christmas.
Sure.
And in that research, I kind of come across this idea, Santa Claus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And depictions of Santa Claus that, look like an Amanita Muscaria.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going, that was perplexing to me. So, okay, there's something going on here.
Sure.
And I don't know if you want to elaborate on that a little bit, but it brings us into the realm of shamanism, right?
Yeah, of course. Well, shaman, the word shaman comes from the Siberians. That's what they called their medicine people. They were the shamans. And now shaman is a word that's used, all across the world for medicine workers. Mm-hmm. So the Siberian shamans, they would wear red and white. They would travel the reindeer, really like Amanita Muscaria. So there was a tie-in with reindeer. They would travel into the yurt's chimneys because of snowdrift to deliver the mushrooms to the townspeople. And then they would hang the mushrooms on the mantle above the fireplace or on the coniferous trees that they would bring in for their winter solstice rituals. And so there's a lot of fun little tie-ins to there.
Yes. And just to plug myself, I think you can still download and watch the video I put together on that.
Yeah, cool.
But I kind of feel like that was sort of my long loop around and coming back and sort of reconnecting with this tradition that had kind of just fallen off my radar screen.
Sure.
Because I was very curious about that.
Yeah.
And then looked into it. And then so my mind was kind of prepped in a way for you to show up.
Sure.
In a sense.
It's beautiful. It's so interesting. The mushroom shows up to people when there's preparation that seems to happen and that's we've polled our customer base and everybody gets primed for it often or more often than not prior to it coming into their lives, just like I was primed for it.
Well, I've had my first experiences and I've been doing small doses. Actually what I found is that I've always had sleep issues my whole life, and it's sort of one of the curses of my life is to wake up at night, wide awake, ever since I was a little kid, laying there in bed at 2 a.m., trying desperately to fall asleep. And the harder I tried to fall asleep, the more remote sleep became. Yep. And I still struggle with that. I wake up at night, and particularly when I have to go somewhere the next morning, fly out on a plane or whatever, and I know I got to get up, and it just... And then I lay there awake all night. I get out. I'm going to do maybe go visit and do a podcast. And then, I get there. And so what I do now is I kind of I want to have a cushion day where I can get to wherever I'm going and then sleep.
Sure.
When I took the capsules, I took one of the Blue Lotus.
Yep.
And one of the capsules, I was in, what can I say? I slept. I went to bed, I slept. And one of the things then is, I've got an old back injury, and every once in a while it flares up, and I'm hobbling along I would say like an old man, but I guess technically I am an old man.
No.
Oh, okay. But, so that would have made it even more difficult to get a good night's sleep.
Sure.
I have to say I slept really just like a baby. And 8 hours, usually I'll wake up 4 or 5 hours, wake up, get up, do stuff or whatever, and then finally, half a day later, the rest of my sleep period kicks in. But, I mean, I just slept for about 8 hours. And when I woke up, I was just, So this is one of the typical effects, right?
Yeah. When you're influencing GABA, and increasing the inhibitory neurotransmitters, it can help with, things like relaxation, and not necessarily that it's like sedating, but I mean it can be to an extent. But
I wouldn't call it sedating.
But it's relaxing, right?
It relaxing.
It also quiets the thoughts, which can be really powerful. And it almost gives weights to the thoughts in a sense, which can also be really powerful, and it changes the way that oftentimes that people see things, and it almost kind of produces a similar experience to like meditation,
Yeah.
And so it can help people fall into a restful sleep and then stay there. Did you notice any dream enhancement? I don't think I've asked you.
Yes, I did have dreams.
Yeah.
I did. I had dreams that I don't remember what the dreams. This is 2 weeks ago,
Sure.
3 weeks ago. But yeah, so you sent me some samples, and the Blue Lotus, they didn't last long.
Yeah, for sure. Good. I like that. Yeah. It's also a fascinating plant. The ancient Egyptians' most revered plant medicine, or at least most known revered plant medicine. I mean, you get into the sacred mushroom book, and he would argue that Amanita Muscaria actually was the most revered, but since they were remnants of the mushroom cults that kept everything secretive and wouldn't write about it, there's no glyphs or anything of Amanita, but Blue Lotus is all over the stele. I mean, King Tut, when they opened up his sarcophagus, his body is covered in Blue Lotus petals. And,
oh, really?
Yeah.
Didn't know that. Well, yeah, I really liked the Blue Lotus, so I'm going to be hopefully procuring some more.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. Try it before drumming. I'm telling you. Yeah. It boosts, it adds this, like, this flowy, like, creative, it allows, you have a different viewpoint, right? And you're able to flow in a different way. And I'd be curious to hear how it affects
I will definitely try that.
Yeah.
I will definitely try. Well, and then I found out you're a drummer as well, so I'm looking forward to we both grew up in canoes in Minnesota.
We did, yeah.
We're both drummers, so I think you're going to have to make a journey back.
Please.
We'll do some canoeing and some drumming.
That sounds great. Maybe drumming on the canoes,
Well, now there we have, that's an idea, isn't it? I check the tone of everything. When the boys brought in the table that they made here, the first thing I have to do is, okay, sounds good. We'll take it. When we get the new countertops in the kitchen, I had to check the tone there. But should we talk about this?
Sure.
Is this the time? Because I've got this package that I haven't opened. I wasn't going to open it until you got here because I wanted to make sure I knew exactly what I should be doing with this. But here we go. I mean, this is. So
I mean, these are the mushrooms, and so this is. They're dried. So there's a few caveats that I should explain, and we're gonna get a little bit into pharmacology just to understand what's actually going on in the mushrooms. So there's 3 main compounds in Amanita muscaria. One is ibotenic acid, glutaminergic, affects the glutamate system. The other is muscimol, GABAergic, it affects the GABA system. And the third is muscarine, and that affects the acetylcholine system. So, and that one's very minor, and it probably has a very minute effect, but acetylcholine is what's, all of the nootropics and smart drugs out there hit the acetylcholine system. It's responsible for memory and attention, et cetera, et cetera. So it has this like nootropic quality to it, or focusing, or mind enhancement, we'll say. But so in nature, it only produces ibotenic acid and muscarine, so it's not producing any muscimol, which is the GABAergic. So if you have a fresh mushroom right out of the ground, it has super high concentrations of ibotenic acid and almost no muscimol in it. So you have to dry it, and that decarboxylates or converts the ibotenic acid into muscimol. So when you have them dried, you convert a good percentage into muscimol, giving it more of that GABAergic effect. Now you can prepare it even further by utilizing heat and acidity. So and the easiest way to accomplish this is by making a tea. So one will add the mushrooms to a pot of water with a good amount of lemon juice, where you get your acidity. You boil it for 20 to 30 minutes and then strain and drink. And that'll give you, so it alters the experience that one's having, depending on if you eat them dry like this, or take a capsule like that, or if you heat them up and it goes through the decarboxylation process. So something like the gummies, for instance, those go through a decarb process, so they have more muscimol and less ibotenic acid. Where something like the capsules or the raw mushroom caps have more ibotenic acid and less muscimol. Now, another fun fact is ibotenic acid converts and decarboxylates into muscimol in the body. And that's where, like, you have stories of in Siberia, the shamans would eat the raw caps, or maybe they'd brew a tea, and then then the muscimol is not fully metabolized, so it gets excreted into the through the urine. So that shamans would, urinate in large vats and hand it around to the townspeople who would drink it and then get their intoxication or whatever. And they would drink, reindeer urine too, I guess. And it's interesting.
The reindeer consume the mushrooms?
The reindeer consume the mushrooms.
Interesting.
Yeah, which ties into the Christmas story,
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, so these, with the raw mushrooms themselves, there's two ways to do it, right? You can take them raw as is, and you get more ibotenic acid, or you can brew the tea and get more muscimol. Generally, if one is taking larger doses, and I don't recommend anybody to take larger doses until they're very experienced with it, and if you're taking really large doses, like, it's probably wise to have somebody there with you, because it can be quite the experience, but when it's a low dose, it's very well tolerated, and low dose can be up to like 3 to 5 grams or so. That sounds like a lot. With psilocybin, that's a lot. That's a heroic dose, but Amanita has a different dosing table to it. But then, with larger doses, one really wants to make a tea, because too much ibotenic acid can make one nauseous. So then if one is like eating the mushroom right out of the ground, it has such a high hit of ibotenic acid that 9 out of 10 times you're going to have pretty unpleasant experience, and that's where a lot of those old reports online come from, because they had no idea, they didn't know any better, so they're just eating them out of the ground. But yeah, so we can, so we have the capsules and the raw caps. If you want, you're welcome to eat a cap. Although I'm gonna take a few caps. I'll eat a cap. We'll do that one, and then you can take capsules or eat a cap, whatever you like. And then in like half hour, 45 minutes, we're gonna check in and see how you're feeling. Up to you. We can go all out and eat 5 cap. No, I'm just kidding.
All right, I'll definitely take a cap.
Anyway, we'll do a relatively small cap for you. So that's probably like 2.5 capsules worth, give or take.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And they it tastes kind of like what you would imagine it would taste like. So they're not the most pleasant, but they're not bad.
Okay. So just put it in my mouth and chew it up.
Yeah,
Here we go.
I like to swallow it kind of like a pill,
Oh.
They're not the most pleasant, but it's a mushroom, dried mushroom. It's not that bad.
Not bad.
It's kind of like an umami flavor a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, in this book, The Sacred Mushroom by Andrija Puharich, it's the earliest work about Amanita Muscaria, and it's such an interesting story. So I don't know are you familiar with Andrija Puharich other than this book?
No, that's the only one that I know. He's got other books out there.
He did a lot of work for the CIA and stuff, and he has a lot of really interesting stuff that he did. But I believe this is one of his first real bodies of work. But so he was an ESP researcher, like back in the 50s.
Okay, yeah.
And then he got, I don't know if he got recruited or joined the army or something, and was working as a doctor or something like that. But he still had his research center going. And one day his assistant calls him and says that there was this man, can't remember the guy's name, that came in and touched an ancient Egyptian artifact and went into a psychometric trance and started speaking ancient Egyptian and like verified ancient Egyptian and writing ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. And so he was so intrigued that he came back and started researching and working with this guy. And most of the book is him trying to figure out if the guy is hoaxing or not. And in the end he realizes like there's no way he could be hoaxing any of this. But the man was talking about he brought on this personality I believe named Ra-Hotep, of this Egyptian priest from 4,500 years ago, who was telling these stories about these ancient mushroom rites and rituals that they would do. And it turns, throughout investigating all this, it very much sounds like they're working with Amanita Muscaria. And it ties back into that fact that, like, yeah, these mushroom these mushroom cults back in the day where they didn't write about what they were going through, so there's no evidence of this in any of the Egyptian bodies of work or anything. And who knows? But it's a really fascinating story nonetheless. And he ends up doing a lot of research with Amanita specifically, and they didn't know how to prepare it, or they didn't know any of the things that we're talking about right now. So they didn't know proper dosing or anything like that. But what he found was, when people are taking Amanita, their extrasensory perception, or ESP abilities, get magnified by a tenfold. So, and he found with people that are already sensitives, or people that, if they get that card test or whatever, and they're able to have a statistical, anomaly in the amount of cards they can guess or whatever, if they already have that ability and they're taking Amanita, their ability to intuitively, receive information goes through the roof, which is really interesting because it ties back into that story that I told when Frank the lizard, and we've done polls with customers also, and it seems that, very reliably people report really profound increases with intuition, with synchronicity, psychic abilities. And so it's the first real body of work written about Amanita Muscaria.
So how is Frank doing today?
He's dead, unfortunately. Yeah.
He passed on.
Thanks for asking that.
As a kid, I raised lizards, so
Cool.
I had a thing for lizards.
Yeah.
To me, they were like little dinosaurs.
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I had leopard geckos at once. I had a bearded dragon at one point.
Yeah. Oh yeah, okay. So we've got Soma here. And there's a nice illustration on the cover of an Amanita Muscaria.
Yeah, Soma, Divine Mushroom of Immortality. So this is the next real body of work that came out about Amanita, and it's Gordon Wasson. He has an interesting story too. He was a J.P. Morgan banker, so not the typical person that you would imagine kind of doing this stuff. And he was invited to go have a psilocybin experience with Marina Sabina, who is like the psilocybin shaman and Awaka, I believe, who she's the reason that psilocybin became popularized in the West, and it's actually due to him. And he went down and had this experience with her, I think in 55 maybe, and he wrote an article in Life magazine about his experience called something magic mushrooms or something like that, and it ended up gaining a lot of interest around these mushrooms, but it also ruined Maria Sabina's life, unfortunately, because it caused tourism and psychedelic tourism, and it kind of completely it's kind of this like.
And roughly what year is this?
I think, it was 55 that he went and did it. I think it was 57 that he wrote the article, I believe.
Okay.
It's too bad, but it's also, I'm thankful that he had that experience, but it's too bad that it caused so much friction and chaos in her life and in Awaka. But then in 68 he released Soma, the Divine Mushroom of Immortality, in which he argues, and it's a pretty, it's an interesting argument. It seems really solid when you're reading the book. However, there's been so much conjecture around it and so much debate around it, and his whole career was ripped apart, and he was ridiculed for years and years and years. But the thesis was that Soma, which is the divine drink of immortality in the Rig Veda, which was a deity. It was the only deity that wasn't extra dimensional or in the heavenly realms. It was the only deity that had physicality on earth, and it was this brew that they would drink. And his argument was that Soma was made from Amanita Muscaria, and it's an interesting argument. Who knows? But then there are, we were hanging out with Tim Hogan a little bit ago, and he was at, I think it was Angkor Wat, and he showed us this glyph that he recorded with like Amanita mushrooms all over the Buddha and stuff. Like, who knows? Like, there's really fascinating potential tie-ins, and it's definitely a possibility. So that's Gordon Wasson, and then John Allegro came out, I think, a couple years later and released, Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, and that's another interesting story. John Allegro was a philologist, and one of the the few researchers tasked with deciphering the Dead Sea Scrolls when they were discovered in Qumran, I think. He wrote the book based on what he discovered, or what he believes he discovered, and the thesis of the book was that, the entire Christian story of Jesus Christ is essentially an allegory for the mushroom life cycle and the mushroom, and all the different names have different correlations to different aspects of the Amanita mushroom. And it's a far-fetched claim, I don't know. It's but it's a really interesting body of work, and it's a really it's an intense, very deep read that can get a little dry and difficult at times. But it's a fascinating concept.
Well, my research into Mithraism, which was the primary competitor to Christianity, led me to believe circumstantially that they were using some kind of a substance they were taking, and it was probably a drink. And so when I really got, and this is 15, 20 years ago, when I was really getting into the Mithraism, because I hadn't understood that there had been this competitor to Christianity that in fact almost became the dominant religion of the Roman Empire at the time. And then as I got into it and began to conclude, it sure looks like their ritual was accompanied by the ingestion of something that was probably brewed up. And then from that point, I thought, well, it wouldn't be that far-fetched that early Christians may have been doing something. And then I have reason to believe that, the early, the precursors to the Masonic rituals also involved ingestion of probably some DMT related.
Sure, acacia, right?
Yeah, because acacia is so important in the Masonic tradition, and that's one of the primary plant sources of DMT.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's so hard to not believe that they were utilizing psychedelics and psychoactive plants back then. And then with like Mithraism and Christianity, aren't there some crazy tie-ins with it's Mithra? Is that the
and ultimately Mitra.
Yeah. They have like a very like virgin birth and like crucifixion. Blah, blah,
December 25th.
December 25th. Yeah. And so like if it is. If those stories are allegories or embellishments or whatever it may be based on, like it who knows, but it's a really interesting thought. But then you have the Eucharist, like they were for sure utilizing something, whether it was psychoactive, I don't know, but John Allegro would say, I believe that if it was at the very least the Eucharist was likely Amanita Muscaria. It makes sense, it's definitely a possibility.
Well, it does to me make sense, and I don't see any, moral reason why you should reject it out of hand. I mean, after all, we're talking about natural substances here. It's part of the natural order of creation.
Yeah.
And why utilizing the psychoactive substances that have been provided to us by nature itself? Why would that be proscribed behavior?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and then, so John Allegro's career was destroyed. He was decimated, it's to the average person that might sound like a really, really outlandish, far-fetched claim, and maybe it is, but then years later, there were the discoveries of all these ancient, depictions of Christ with an Amanita head, or in like churches around Europe back in the day, or some of the earlier depictions of Adam and Eve have been covering themselves with Amanita caps as opposed to the fig leaves that we hear about nowadays. And so all of these depictions, give a lot of credence to his potential theory. And then there's, some cave paintings from thousands and thousands of years ago depict mushrooms. You have ancient coins with mushrooms on them, and it ties back into like the ancient mushroom cults that we've talked about. And
there were ancient mushroom cults.
Sure.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
You familiar with the work of Terence McKenna?
Of course. Yeah. Love Terence.
And how would I read several of his works. Again, 2020. He was still alive, actually. I don't remember specifically any references to Amanita Muscaria. He may have had some in there, but
he was much more on the psilocybin kick, but and he had I believe this is correct. He had a bad experience with Amanita and then was like, nope, that can't be. And then later in his life, closer to the end, he like retracted his stuff and was like, actually, like I kind of agree with John Allegro.
Yeah, okay. I was not aware of that.
Yeah, and then there's this is the piece that I was just authorized to talk about this publicly. We'll say, and it's Jack Herrera, and so Jack Herrera was he's a cannabis legend. You know, he was like, I believe he was one of the founders of the early cannabis churches, and this wasn't that long ago. But at the end, so anybody that smokes weed like is familiar with the Jack Herrera strain. You know, it's a very common, powerful strain.
Okay.
And he, at the end of his life, he switched completely over to Amanita. Nobody knows this, but I think he had a stroke and he utilized Amanita, and it brought his brain function back, and so he used it on hundreds of people suffering with TBI or any sort of brain injury, and it pretty reliably brings people back. And on a little side note, I have a cat right now who's 17, and she's her brain's starting to go away, and her vision is she can't really see anymore, and I just started feeding her Amanita like a week ago, and she's like back to life. It's pretty crazy. It's
really?
Cool. It's cool to see, But so Jack Herrera like wrote this book about Amanita, and it's called The Most High, and he, from what I was told, one of my good friends was the caretaker for him at the end of his life, and from what she says, he was murdered for the book. They killed him, and they stole the book and wouldn't allow it to be published. I don't know, possibly.
Yeah, well.
And she's the only person that has a copy of the book and was granted the rights by the court, it sounds like. And so we're hopefully, I just got a copy on a digital copy like a month ago, and we're hoping to be able to publish that at some point.
Oh, that would be awesome.
But his whole thesis is that he agrees with John Allegro 100%. He says that Constantine basically made up the Christian story that we have. Not that there wasn't like somebody named, what he says, not that there wasn't somebody back in the day that was a big healer and yada yada, but the story was greatly embellished, and they put in a lot of metaphors and analogies for the mushroom life cycle throughout the story, and he cites it to like some of the in the beginning the mushrooms were viewed as gods. This is what he says, and then as we developed mathematics and astronomy, the gods became heavenly, but the mushrooms became the messengers of the gods. And what are the messengers of the gods? They're the angels, and that's why you have so many mushrooms with the word angel in their name, like the destroying angel or angel wings. And then he goes on to say that which angel wears red and white with gold accents, which is what the mushroom is, and that's Archangel Gabriel. And it just so happens that my business partner's name is Gabriel, and my name's Christian. It's an interesting little.
Yeah, well, I did notice. I took note of that.
Yeah.
When the first time we had that conversation, I thought Christian and Gabriel.
Yeah.
Okay, well, no.
Yeah, we get
just a coincidence.
We get a little far out, but man, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, interesting, and of course, Soma, divine mushroom of immortality.
Yeah,
I like that concept.
Yeah, for sure.
Not that I'd want to live forever, but I wouldn't mind. Hey, I enjoy life, and I've got so many books to read, so many places to go, so many people to meet. I need another 75 years.
It'd be cool to be able to say when you want to check out. That would be nice. Like, it's up to you. That would be cool. I would like that.
Yeah. Well, I was feeling my years today when we're going up the long steps.
Yeah.
And then here comes Show-Off Trent, bounding 3 steps at a time.
He only did that to show you up,
I know. That's
right.
So okay, so you start your business, and what year did you actually launch the business formally?
It was 2020. Well, so it was a cannabis business, and then my first mushroom sale was June 14th of 2021.
Okay.
And then I switched completely over to mushrooms within a couple months and dropped the whole cannabis side of it.
Because a lot of people are selling cannabis these days, but I don't know anybody other than you.
I was the first. There are a handful of people that have come up, and not even that far after me. We're the largest by quite a large margin. But yeah, I'm all for anybody wanting to get in this business. Like and from my perspective, like I was put on this mission by the mushroom or something much greater than myself, and like I'm on a mission to get the mushroom out to as many people as it might help, you know. And so, like, anybody else that wants to get involved and help with that, like, please, by all means. And this ties in, you know, we call what we do sacred commerce, because it's like the goal is to help. The goal is to have as large of a positive impact on the world and humanity as we can. And you know, money is obviously a part of it. Like, we need to be profitable to function, but that's, you know, when the goal is positive impact, everything just flows a lot smoother. You know?
Yeah. Well, my philosophy is in my work, you know, as a builder, I use many tools, and every tool has its purpose and function in getting to the goal, which is to be able to successfully complete a project. And money is a tool. That's how I look at
Absolutely.
it. It's not, to me, the pursuit of money is not the goal. Money is a means to get to the goal.
Yep.
And and I think this is sort of a new ethic of what I consider sort of enlightened capitalism. Yep. It's transcended the old, we're just going to get as much profit as we can. We're primarily fixated on profit. Like you said, profit's necessary. You got to get profit. You can't grow the business without profit. Yep. You have to have something in excess over your costs in order to be able to recycle it back in, reinvest it back in, and then you can grow the business. But you know, I've always gotten as much satisfaction from, you know, finishing a project and having 100% customer satisfaction and knowing I've accomplished something that is going to probably long outlast me.
Yeah.
You know, I'm always looking for these overlaps between, you know, that my philosophy of business, and so you know, talking to you is interesting because it kind of fits into this pattern that I've sort of seen emerge within the last couple of years of getting to know people who've started businesses with this new, what I guess think of as a new ethic.
Yeah.
And you are certainly fitting in that category.
Yeah.
And very tangibly, you now have a product that is going to help people.
Yeah. It's, you know, we've probably helped, and I shouldn't even say it like that. The mushroom that we've helped get out to people has seen probably 5,000 to 10,000 people get off of benzodiazepine. That's huge.
Now that's huge.
Massive,
that's huge.
And then probably 60 to 100,000 people whose lives have been completely transformed because of it. And like, it's so strange for me because I'm just this dude from Minnesota that, you know, had this crazy experience and like is just doing what I can to help the world. And it's so cool to see it. It's an egregore, right? It's not me at this point. It's this entity that's been formulated by all the pieces working together. And
this is something that, you know, the feedback I've gotten in the last few years is like the people are engaged in one aspect or another. It's like last week I interviewed Tony Muscaria. Oh, Tony, sorry, Tony, your last name, I will get it correct. But he's launched a whole line of products where that was the result of him researching the origins of fluoride and how it ended up in our water, in our toothpaste, and we had to. I learned something discussing with him. I had no idea that the fluoride excesses were produced as a byproduct of nuclear weapons testing.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
I didn't know that, but he laid the whole thing out and showed they had to look for, because it was helping to justify. Well, look, there's this byproduct, this poisonous byproduct of nuclear weapons testing, but look, there's a positive use for it.
It's going to help your teeth.
It's going to help your teeth. So he's developed a whole line of toothpastes using silver as as the bactericide.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, so we're going to work out doing a little affiliate relation with him. And, you know, we do CBD, we do several others, and I'm kind of getting this sense now there's like a network forming of people who, we want to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
And it's time. We need to make the world a better place.
Yep.
And there's these multiple modalities that seem to be sort of converging into this mindset of, we can live comfortably, but not excessively. We don't need to. And Yeah, and we can produce a product or a service that makes the world a better place.
Yeah.
And you certainly seem to fit that. And as I learn more about your work, that's when I'd say, yeah, okay, Christian fits directly into this model of want to call it evolutionary capitalism.
I like that. Yeah.
Getting us away from dependency upon the big authoritarian state and all of its, and the corporatocracy. Yeah. And certainly, you know, the pharmaceutical drugs, I think there's a place for that within the spectrum.
Yeah.
But when you get to the point where you've got this collusion between certain economic players and the government, then you've skewed the free market. And I think what you're doing is totally 100% free market.
Yeah, for sure.
I love it.
For sure.
And am I feeling anything yet? Right.
I think we got like 10, 15 minutes probably.
To go?
Maybe though. I don't know. You might be really sensitive.
So what is this now?
So that's Kana. So yeah, so Amanita it's our bread and butter. It's the whole reason that it all started. It encompasses 80 to 90% of the business, but then Blue Lotus, as we spoke about, is probably second, and then Kana is third. And then I have 15, 20 other psychoactive, plant medicines that are legal that we work with, but those are the big three. And so Kana it's a succulent from South Africa, and it works in the brain as an SRI. So you think of SSRIs like Prozac or Zoloft, right? They're selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Kana is not selective. It also doesn't pull on the receptor sites, so it doesn't downregulate serotonin production over time. There's no addiction potential or withdrawal from it. And what it does is it inhibits the reuptake of serotonin, meaning it allows the brain to have more of a supply of serotonin. And serotonins are a happy chemical, so it produces a nice mood lift. And so, in South Africa, they'll prescribe people Kana root, and they'll say, go chew this root 3 times a day for your depression. And a lot of people will use it for socializing as kind of a social lubricant, or for dancing. Some people call it nature's MDMA, because MDMA also works on serotonin very heavily. I don't quite agree with nature's MDMA, but yeah, it has a potent mood lifting quality to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you just mentioned the word legal. Why don't you? I mean, we're dealing with all these are legal products.
Yeah, 100%. Yep. With one caveat, the state of your neighbor, the state of Louisiana, unfortunately placed a blanket ban on any and all psychoactive plant. So they literally just put a list together of any psychoactive plant that they could find and placed the ban. I think it was early 2000s.
Just putting this list together, say, nope, your people aren't allowed to benefit from the products of nature.
Yep.
It's so crazy.
Yep. It's insane.
I often have thought, I'm old enough to remember when the whole psychedelic revolution really began. I was probably in middle school when that really began to happen in 64 to 66. And by 67 to 68, it was becoming full-blown part of the culture. Mm-hmm. And then, it was all outlawed. But what was happening, and this is the irony of the situation. You had people like Timothy Leary, who was branded a dangerous crackpot, and and others who were doing research at that time in psychedelics. You probably remember John C. Lilly and his work.
Of course, yeah. He went to the same school that I did, St. Paul Academy in Minnesota.
Oh,
yeah.
See, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Fellow Minnesotan. Yeah.
There we go. There's got to be something going on there. But anyways, there was a very promising methodology of using the plants and the substances for healing what ails us psychically, and it was all driven underground. It was all suppressed and driven underground, and of course I think one of the main reasons for that is because this is where the authoritarian state was really coming into prominence, and the fear was that people start imbibing these substances, these tools of nature, they start thinking independently. They become immune to the propaganda, because literally that was my experience. You instantly saw through the propaganda. You could see that it was just contrived. This is not representing reality. This is something that has been put out into society to control people. And Nixon was told that those anti-war demonstrators are all pot smokers. So if you start cracking down on the drugs and the cannabis and stuff, it'll give us an excuse to arrest them and throw them in jail because we can't arrest them for protesting. That's a protected activity in the constitutional system. So we have to come up with some other way. But since they all smoke pot and this and that gives us a convenient method to go after them. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what they did. I mean, Richard Nixon gave us the drug war.
Yep.
And I don't... The negative effects of the drug war from that time to now, in my mind, have been incalculable.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so much, I constantly see this, so much of the things that are going on in society right now, I think, are byproducts of that ignorant and authoritarian-driven reaction and the policies imposed upon society.
Yep.
And hopefully now we might be in a position, but we're still in, the same thing. We're still deluged under propaganda, lies, distortions of the truth. Back then, media actually was much freer than it is now. Yeah. Media is controlled. But see, this is the beauty and the power of what you're doing and what others are doing, is that there is a network around the world of people, realizing, okay, so right now the whole narrative is being controlled, but I think it's falling apart. People aren't buying into it anymore. And I met a woman about 3 years ago, an attorney who is setting up. She walks over in a nearby cemetery where Julie and I walk regularly. So I've gotten to know her, and we share an interest in astronomy. Sure. And we were out. I met her. We were out. I have my phone app, Star Walk 2.
Sure.
Which I use all the time. I'm out there. Okay.
I have that one. Yeah.
You have that too?
That's fun. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun. So I turned her on to that, and anyhow, I ran into her last week. She'd just come back from London, and she's setting up a network of attorneys that are very much freedom oriented, and she's gonna launch a podcast, and I don't know how I missed her contact. She said probably she sent it to my old email, but she said about 2 or 3 months ago she was trying to contact me because she knew I did a podcast, and she wanted to have me help coach her through the process of launching a podcast. Yeah. So once you guys are gone this coming week, I'm going to invite her over here to see the studio and what we've got going on here. She's going to give me some really interesting legal advice about some of the issues that I'm kind of involved with right now. But and then she's going to tell me more about this network of attorneys who are wanting to. The idea is basically they're going to be a legal structure that people like us can refer to.
Amazing.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
I think that
needed.
yeah we need that. Yeah. So there are things happening. We just got to endure and survive for a little while yet, and I think we can. I'm optimistic, but boy, sometimes I get disturbed at some of the things that are happening in the world that are connected with the activities of our own government. Yeah. And I feel like America was supposed to be sort of the way humanity could access higher levels of freedom, and that's why religion. Look, you're free to practice whatever religion, and and if that includes taking the substances provided to us by nature, I look at that as an inherent right.
Of course, absolutely.
A right that's right up there with all the rest of what we would think the fundamental rights, natural rights, and I think that the authoritarian state wants to keep us in ignorance, but I don't think it's going to work. I think would you think that we're kind of in a, I don't know, like a psychedelic revival, perhaps?
Yeah. Well, it feels not only that, it feels like aspects of the old guard, we'll say, are dying, and like you said, like so many more people are. I think COVID had a lot to do with it too. It's interesting also that the mushroom hit the scene during COVID as well. But so many people were awakened to some of what's actually going on in the world. And like there's this growing amount of people that are just not going to have it anymore. And unfortunately that also means that the old guard, or whatever you want to call it, is also, it seems to be lashing out and trying to get more of a firm grip on what's going on.
Yes.
But I think, as the laws of the universe, the pendulum will swing, and it's swinging back the other way. Or that's how it feels to me. And I think like energetically, like internally, that's how it feels. It feels like things are shifting right now, and what we are doing is a part of God or the universe's way to bring about this shift. Which is a beautiful thing.
Beautiful thing. Kind of like rectifying the balance, because I think it's gotten imbalanced.
Yeah, 100%.
And I'm both encouraged and discouraged. primarily encouraged that some of the things that are happening now are going to really lead us to a better world. But at the same time, I kind of, oh my God, just I thought at several points throughout the last 40 or 50 years, let's say the early 90s with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. I'm thinking, okay, now we can shift our resources to doing things that are going to better humanity, better the world.
Right.
But then as I saw what progressed from there, I realized, okay, we've got a faction now that rather than saying, yes, we can convert our swords into plowshares and we're going to get past the Cold War. I mean, I think, we a couple of times, 62, Cuban Missile Crisis, 73, crisis in the Middle East that led to almost as confrontational as the Cuban Missile Crisis. But I thought, we're going to be able to shift these resources, and boy, what are we going to be able to do now that the Cold War is over? And no, what happened was we had a faction that saw the opportunity, and the opportunity was, our main competitor to global domination has now been removed from the equation. So start building all these new military bases in the Middle East. And what's happening now? We've invested trillions of dollars, and it looks like it's looking more and more like that was just a complete waste.
Yep.
And how can we salvage something out of this? Something. I always look. Even is there any silver lining to this? But I mean, I don't know. Maybe it took this whole thing to like really jerk. COVID and now this, for people to go, wait time out. We need to rethink where we're going here.
Yeah.
And I am always, maybe I'm in a fantasy world, but I think that, we've got the blueprint, the template for essentially restoring the garden.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think I would prefer to go that route rather than perpetual war.
I think so. That sounds good to me.
And what you're doing, though, I mean, and other people are doing, I think, is really putting the pressure in that direction.
Yeah.
And I want more of that.
Yeah, for sure. What do you think happened? Like, so you had the psychedelic renaissance, which we're seeming to see a revival of, although it's becoming corporatized and commercialized, which is really too bad. One of the cool things about this mushroom is that it's well, first off, it's legal, so like there's no bars or restrictions, but it's mycorrhizal, so that means it grows in symbiosis with tree roots. So you need a host tree for it to grow. We can't farm it, so I couldn't go build a lab and like grow metric tons of this to sell. Like, so nobody can come in and commercialize it, at least not as of yet. Maybe somebody will figure it out, but anyways, what do you think about how the falling out of kind of like the hippie movement, and like, because it moved from peace and love to then like Charles Manson, and then like cocaine, and and
good question.
And
and I haven't looked into it, but there's evidence now that Charles Manson was groomed by the CIA. I don't know to what extent that is and how plausible those arguments are, because I haven't really looked into it. But clearly Charles Manson, really, that whole thing really sabotaged the movement back then. It really did. I remember, I participated in, protests against the war. Here's one of the things I do remember. We would have these meetings to try to lay out some strategies, and it was all, the focus was, clearly over and over again, the Gandhian approach, nonviolent. Yet there was always somebody who would instigate violence. And everybody, it was almost like a standing joke. You know, you could almost pick out, here's the provocateurs planted by the government.
They were planted, that was my question.
Planted by the government.
Yeah.
But I also noticed that there seemed to be, and of course this is an oversimplified categorization, but I kind of noticed that when you looked at the broad spectrum of people that were participating, you had kind of two factions. On the one, I call them the hippies, and the other one was the Marxists. And from the hippie side, I got the impression these are just people who want the war over.
Yeah.
There's no other agenda.
Right.
The Marxists, you always knew them. They always had their little red book of Mao, always quoting Mao like it's the word from on high or whatever, you know, spouting Marxist rhetoric. And I got the impression from those people, okay, this is a rationale for them to promote their agenda that goes beyond just trying to stop the war. There's something else going on here, you know. And so I kind of came away, even as a 19, 20, 21-year-old, that I kind of came away with that distinction. And of course, I tended more towards the hippie side because my thought was, by that time, by 69, 70, I knew people that were killed over there, and kids I'd grown up with, and had people coming back. They'd done their tour of duty, and they're coming back, and they're going. I knew people that like rah patriots that signed up, and went over there to fight communism, and came back and said it's all bullshit. So then in the aftermath of Vietnam, there was a thing, it came up in the Reagan administration, we need an antidote to the Vietnam syndrome, which because by 73, 74, America was pretty much sick of war. It's just sick of war. We've had enough. And everybody knew somebody that had suffered some way, more so than now. And that's why one reason they dropped, they discontinued, they kept selective service, but they got rid of the draft. And I figure, well, why you're getting rid of the draft, but you're keeping selective service, which suggests to me you're keeping the machinery in place to bring the draft back.
Sure.
Right. And now we see the first rumblings in Congress, there's talk about bringing the draft back. Yeah. Well, I hope not, but that might be what it takes. I mean, heaven forbid, but going back to the 60s and early 70s, the draft, because of the draft, you had all these soldiers that are going over there and who really didn't want to be there. Yeah. And of course they had no allegiance to the narrative at all.
Yeah.
So they came back, and had a lot of negative things to say, and so I mean I think that was part of the philosophy of going to the all-volunteer army.
Sure. Because
look, you joined up of your own volition. Nobody forced you, so shut up.
Yeah.
That was kind of the idea. And then, Carter came in, and for a couple of years there, it looked like détente. We were talking to each other. The confrontation sort of resolved itself temporarily, but then behind the scenes you had this whole thing with Afghanistan, and the plow. What was his name again? He came up with the idea of, hey, if we can somehow maneuver and manipulate the Soviet Union into invading Afghanistan, that'll be like their Vietnam. Which in a way it kind of was, but that opened the whole door to a revival of the Cold War.
Sure.
That after it had really subsided there in the 70s, and then in 78, 79 with the invasion of Afghanistan, it was all revived in the 1980 Olympics. We're gonna boycott the Olympics because the Russians are in it, and I thought that was just ridiculous. But then Reagan came in, and Reagan won the election. On a big part of it was military supremacy, and he ramped up a whole new generation of arms, nuclear arms, basically developing first strike capability, which the transition from the 50s and 60s was mutual assured destruction.
Right.
In other words, we've got these huge hydrogen bombs, 10 megatons. If we drop a 10 megaton bomb on your city is gone. So you don't dare attack us,
right.
because if you attack us, we can retaliate. And this is when we developed the nuclear triad. So you got the forward-based bombers, you've got the intercontinental missiles, and then you've got the submarine-launched ballistic missiles. But all of those were not particularly accurate. But when you're talking a 10 megaton bomb, you don't really need accuracy. If you're going to take out a city, doesn't matter whether you falls right on the center of the city or a mile away. It doesn't matter. But if you're going to take out a missile silo or a hardened command and control center, then you've got to have accuracy, pinpoint accuracy, right? But here was the thing that I realized right away was when I'm looking at the Pershing II, the new cruise missiles, the Trident III, the MX missile, they were all being designed for super accuracy. Okay, so here's the thing. If you are retaliating, if Russia had launched the first strike and we're retaliating, wait a second, mutual assured destruction is you don't dare attack us because we can destroy your whole society. But where does pinpoint accuracy come into the equation? Well, first of all, if we are responding to a first strike, the assumption is that, okay, if somebody's going to make a first strike, you think they'll just send over one or two, delivery weapons, and then, or are they going to launch full on and just in one fell swoop wipe us out? So we have no retaliatory capacity. So in that context, the super precise missile weapons delivery systems didn't make sense. They only made sense in the context of a first strike.
Sure.
Because what's the point of taking out a missile silo if the missile's already been launched?
Yeah.
And that was the development of the Reagan years. And when he came out with we developed we shifted our whole strategy of our nuclear strategy from a response retaliatory to the idea of developing first strike capability. Yeah. And where I was going was that strategic defense initiative made no sense in being a defense against a full-blown first strike coming from the Soviet Union. Where it only made sense was like sort of a mop-up operation, where you might have, whatever missiles survived our first strike, we would be able to intercept them. Yeah. That was the whole rationale behind SDI. Yeah. But then all of those plans were interrupted by the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. So they had to regroup, re-strategize, and come up with creative ways to keep the military budget rising, and they did, and they substituted the war against communism with the war on terrorism.
Sure.
So I guess what I'm trying to get at here is that when we look at the news and mainstream media, we're given this image of what's going on, obvious, this stuff is going on. We see the conflict in Ukraine, we see the conflicts in the Middle East. But really, I think the real action is what you don't see.
Yeah.
And I'm going to pass it back to you to talk about the whole network.
Yeah.
The subterranean ribosomal network.
Yeah, the mycelial network.
The mycelial network. Yeah. Yes, this is where I was kind of going with this. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it connects everything, like we wouldn't have any life without the mycelial network. It passes information and nutrients amongst plants and fungi, and it's interconnected web of information. It's the internet beneath the earth.
It's the internet beneath the earth. See, that's perfect. Interconnected information. Yes, it's a perfect metaphor, I think, almost.
Yeah, and it's all connected. And also on that note too, there's the physical things that are going on behind the scenes that we don't see, but then there's the energetic spiritual aspect of what's happening right now too. That part of things like this coming out and the narrative changing in people's minds and people starting to open up to what actually is going on in the world. It's maybe the tip of this energetic iceberg that we're like floating into, or that's moving through us to hopefully, you know, dismantle the old guard like we've been talking about, and bring about something new, something that we've never seen before. And you know, it seems that it's either like something like that has to happen, or we're going to be, you know, doomed. So I really hope that that's the case, you know.
Well, I mean, yes, I really think we're at an inflection point now. And I think the things like what's going on in the Middle East, what's going on in Ukraine, what's going on in other hotspots around the world, COVID, all of these things are showing us that we can't trust in these antiquated structures of authority who prosper and thrive by essentially keeping us in the dark.
Yep, exactly.
And we've got this runaway system of the classification of information.
Yep.
And it's gotten just ridiculous,
Yep.
the stuff that is being classified. And the way I look at it is most of that classified information is about just protecting the hierarchy.
Yeah.
That's what it's mainly about.
Yep.
And I think it's time we just need to open the floodgates and have a total disclosure about most everything.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I can't fathom really, okay, explain to me, what is it that is supposed to be kept secret?
Right.
You know, and we have this cult of secrecy, and it needs to change. And I think we are on that point where, you know, as we're talking about, I think, you know, we need to reach out and say, okay, and say to people in Russia, the people, not the leaders, the people, we aren't enemies. Mm-hmm. You know, we're all on this planet together. We all face the same problems, the same challenges, and we're not enemies. Don't let our governments turn us into enemies.
Yeah, of course.
Because we're not.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think this is going to help.
Yeah.
This is going to help.
For sure.
It really is.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's back to, you know, what you said the psychedelics did for you in the early days. Like it helps you see through the propaganda. It becomes, you know, obsolete at that point. And this mushroom does it in its own very specific and peculiar and beautiful way, but it does the same thing, just differently, you know. It also I back to like this idea of, you know, we've had misinformation, disinformation, or being kept in the dark pushed on us for thousands and thousands of years. And interestingly enough, this mushroom is one of the earliest, you know, pieces of evidence that I know of this, and that's that myth that it's toxic and poisonous, which from the research that I've done seems to have been perpetuated for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, likely since the Crusades, maybe even before that. And this is a hypothesis, I don't know, but it seems to make sense. Like, if you have this mushroom that had its ties into, well, I mean, it's very prevalent and most paganism around the world, paganism. Its ties into early Christianity. Its ties into, you know, a lot of the major religions, and it's being utilized, and it's helping people break free from the propaganda machine that's been perpetuated for thousands of years.
Yes, propaganda machine.
Yeah, like, what do you do? They weren't classifying plants back then. You know, they weren't making drugs, plants illegal. So what do? You label something as toxic and poisonous when it's not. And you perpetuate that myth across the lands, and that's my theory to why Amanita has been labeled as toxic and poisonous. And they use, so this is a good thing to discuss too, because some people that are more researched on the mushroom itself might have some counterattacks to what I've just said, because ibotenic acid it's used in laboratory settings to induce brain lesions in mice. But what they do is they inject copious amounts of ibotenic acid. We're talking like, this bag is 15 grams. We're talking like kilos worth of isolated, synthesized ibotenic acid directly into the brain. So it's not having to be digested, metabolized, go across the blood-brain barrier, directly into the brain, and it's producing brain lesions, and they're saying it's neurotoxic. And it's like, this is a hit study done, I think, in the 90s or early 2000s, maybe before then. But it's like, well, yeah, if you like injected my brain with 50 grams of ibuprofen, you know, like, it's probably not going to do something good in there, you know. It's probably not going to be great. And so that was, you know, that's something that's perpetuated that narrative, when the actual data shows that, like, it's actually not neurotoxic at all in the doses that people are actually consuming it with. You need to consume kilos of it to get to that level. But yeah, it's interesting, like, the concept that they would have, like, spread this myth 1,000 years ago or however long ago, you know, to keep people away from the mushroom. And
Well, I kind of see some analogies there with the whole Masonic thing and how that has been, we see that being twisted right now. You know, the secrecy, almost as if the secrecy within the Masonic order is directly comparable to the secrecy of the all-powerful state.
Sure.
When in fact the secrecy of Freemasonry was a strategy to survive against
yeah,
the depredations of the all-powerful state.
yeah,
You know, all you have to do is cite the example of every time you get a dictatorial or totalitarian government, Freemasonry is one of the first things to be outlawed.
Yep.
When Hitler became Chancellor of Germany, he outlawed Freemasonry. When Stalin became the dictator of Russia, first thing he did, outlawed Freemasonry.
Yeah.
And this is a pattern that you see. And the secrecy of Freemasonry was, again, a strategy to survive.
Yep.
And I think, from my own experience and becoming familiar with this vast body of symbolism and encoded information, that you know that the Masonic knowledge has been handed down from the Middle Ages, and from generation to generation without anybody really understanding
yeah,
what they were custodians of.
sure.
But they've served the purpose by taking it from one generation, preserving it, and handing it on to the next generation for centuries now.
Yeah.
And as we sit here and talk about, you know, the possibility of there being a DMT connection, you know, nobody, when I went into the craft in the 70s, had even the remotest concept of a connection like that.
Sure.
So I think that, you know, a lot of that is going to be unpacked in the very near future. If we can get through this utter complete nonsense that's being posted on online.
Yeah.
And I point out, you know, people who are trying to invoke, you know, that somehow, you know, Freemasons are, you know, the puppet masters and control. Now, look, we haven't had a Masonic president since Gerald Ford. You know, I've seen things where it shows pictures of George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush, like as if they were never Freemasons.
Yeah.
None of the neocons that I know of, I have investigated, I could find none of them that were Freemasons,
Sure.
right? Because one of the central tenets of Freemasonry is the brotherhood of man,
Sure.
right? And so, you know, it's nonsense, and it's just too bad that you know, something like that is being defamed in the way it is. And so I think, you know, when we talk about people like Tim Hogan and Scott Wolter and you know, I think that it's going to be coming around. I think we've got to sort of reverse this descent into silliness.
Yeah.
You know, I point out that, you know, well, yeah, we know pretty certain that 14 of American presidents were Freemasons,
Sure.
going back to George Washington, of
Right.
course. Like I said, the last one was Gerald Ford. You know, a lot of them, you know, and of course, when you go back, you know, a couple of generations ago, Freemasonry, at least in America, reached its peak right after World War II.
Sure.
And there was about 5 million Freemasons, I think, in the world. Well, if you have an institution or an organization with 5 million people, yeah, you think you're not going to have a few in there, a few
Sure.
rotten apples? Of course you are. And people, you know, who are driven mainly by ambition will look and, oh, okay, I can make all kinds of business contacts and knowing that you go into this craft, you've got a philosophy behind the craft of basically square dealing. I mean, right embedded in our language, you know, we you know, you and I do business together. At the conclusion, we go,
Yep.
are we square?
Yep.
Straight out of the craft ritual. Or you tell me something and I'm, okay, are you on the level? Meaning,
Sure.
I mean, we could go on with the metaphors. This is the philosophy of Freemasonry,
Sure.
right? Well, so you got 14 presidents that were Freemasons. You got, you know, Benjamin Franklin. If you think that Freemasons were this evil institution, puppet man, well, if they're Satan worshipers and drinking children's blood or whatever, or you think George Washington was drinking children's blood, Benjamin Franklin, Paul Revere, Heroes of the Revolution, John Hancock, they were all Freemasons, right? And a lot of the ideas that were transplanted by the Founding Fathers into, our democratic republic, well, you look and they've got their counterparts right there in Freemasonry. In the Middle Ages, what institution would elect their leaders one man, one vote? It provided a model. But 14 presidents. But here's an alternative fact. 23 American presidents were Episcopalians. Do you know that?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, it's a fact.
Interesting.
I read 23 of them were Episcopalian. So what that tells me is if there is some sinister group behind the scenes manipulating the puppet strings, it's got to be the Episcopalians,
of course,
right?
Yeah, of course.
I mean, but no, to me that just sort of underscores how ridiculous some of this stuff is. And it's too bad because it's just distracting, and I've met a lot of younger people that like don't know what to think.
Sure.
Because this proliferation.
Most young people don't know what to think,
Right. Well, that's true, and that's why we need this. But yeah, I'm just, when I entered Freemasonry in '78, you didn't have the internet, so you didn't have this proliferation of these ridiculous conspiracy theories. Yeah. And then I'll drop it because we want to move on to talking about the mythical substrate of this whole thing. But I think the point is that when you have those who are actually concocting real conspiracies, and you can't study history and conclude that, that conspiracies are not real.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Those who covet power, those who have power, they're always going to be doing what they need to do to, right? But see, here's the thing. When you have these, what I think of as fake conspiracy theories, now you get everybody's over here, thinking this or that, these conspiracy theories, because it's turning the attention away from the real ones.
Yep.
That's what it's doing.
Yeah, CIA people have come out and talked about that specifically. Like, we put out misinformation to deter people from,
Yes, deliberately putting out misinformation, that's how I kind of look at the whole climate crisis.
Sure.
I see lots of these groups of younger people, they mean well, they believe we're saving the planet. Yeah. But look, the weather has been weaponized, and you guys are over here thinking we're in a climate crisis, but really we're on the verge of World War III.
Yeah.
There's a real crisis brewing.
Yeah.
And it ain't 100 parts per million of carbon dioxide.
Sure.
Yeah. Anyhow, let's get back to the idea of, because, it almost seems universal. There is this level of really, in my mind, sophisticated, potent knowledge that has come to us via the vehicle of mythology and legends and folklore.
Yep.
And would you like to address?
Yeah,
that?
Of course. And it kind of goes, one of the discussions we were having yesterday, I believe, was about how there's always, in the hero's journey, there's always the other world, right?
There's
the other side, which could be the heavens, it could be the underworld, it could be whatever. It could be the mycelial network. I guess it depends on how you want to look at it. And there's probably lots of different other worlds. Mm-hmm. But then, through the vehicle of storytelling and mythology, we dictate how the physical world is operated and ran, right? So and and then it ties back to what we're just talking about, like the people that are telling the stories or putting the information out that gets believed on a mass scale are the actual ones that are driving history and driving the future. And it's a fascinating subject that I think is starting to. I think psychedelics and stuff tap you directly into that, right? So
absolutely,
it's hard to not see once you've gone through that, and it becomes hard to imagine not being able to see it once you've gone through those experiences, But it's a part of reality for sure.
When I was pretty young when I did my first psychedelic trip. I was 17 years old. Excuse me, which actually, looking back, I think was really probably the ideal time for me because I was not sent into any particular ideology or any models of reality. I was totally open and exploring. But I'd had a good friend for a year, over a year prior to my very first experience, who had this was when I was living in Louisiana, and he just moved from California, and he had already had multiple experiences. So he's always telling me about it. And I kind of came to think, I kind of understood and could imagine what the experience was like, And then I commented that I had contemplated doing it, but never actually proactively moved towards it. And then I went and saw the movie that had just come out then in '68, 2001: A Space Odyssey, right? So the climax of that is when he's going through this time-space tunnel, whatever, with these incredible special effects. As I'm watching, I'm going, wonder psychedelic experience like this. I don't know. Well, so seeing that prompted me to go, you know what? I think I want to try it. Mm-hmm. So I actually procured a couple of hits of LSD. Nice. And it was Purple Haze, Owsley's concoction, Stanley Owsley, and I believe the subject of Jimi Hendrix's song that I'd listened to a million times up to that point. So me and three buddies decided to go out, and but I only had 2 hits, so it was me and one of the guys, and the other 2 didn't have any. And we go to this club where they're playing rock music, and they've got lights and stuff. Not a live band, but it was kids there dancing and all of this. Me and my buddy take the stuff, and we get there, and I come on to it, and the two guys that hadn't taken any were coming up to me, go, whoa, are you feeling it? What's it like? And all I could say was, this isn't what I expected. Yeah. This is not what I expected. Yeah. And I was thinking I'm going to have all these hallucinations. I didn't have any hallucinations. I just looked at everybody, and it was like everybody was wearing a mask. Mm-hmm. Everybody was wearing a mask, and how could I have not seen this before? And from that point on, it was like none of the normal stuff of high school and who was popular and what clique. None of that. Yep. I was so far beyond that, and that launched me. I went, I got to understand what happened. So this book had come out just called The Private Sea, LSD and the Search for God. I was off and running in that direction. And over the next year and a half, I did, and then I did quite a bit of mescaline. Yeah, we were talking about that. And the one most amazing experience I had with mescaline, we were camping out. I'm out on the shores of a beautiful little lake in a grove of trees. I come on, and it was like I became dislodged from the space-time continuum, and it was like I was time traveling. And I'm in Egypt, then I'm in Central America, then I'm in Angkor Wat, but it wasn't Egypt, it wasn't Angkor Wat. It was like the archetype behind all of these things, and I'm going through, and everything is transforming and evolving, and it was like I literally felt like I'd been on a 5 or 6 year journey through space-time to the fundamental archetypes that had motivated our ancestors. And then, of course, I circled back around and began to reconsider what you were talking about, legends and stories and mythology. Read Mircea Eliade, read Carl Jung. I looked into all of the psychic work that was happening then. You had the human potential movement. You had Fritz Perls. You had Maslow. We mentioned earlier Lilly, R.D. Laing, more experiential, and just immerse myself into all of that to try to understand. And then, of course, going into reading, that's when I read this book here. Yeah. Probably. It's so long ago now that I really need to reread it. And read John Allegro's book. And then, Leary's work. I went to a lecture, met Leary briefly in the early 70s at a lecture right after he got released from
Oh, cool.
prison.
Yeah.
I met Ralph Metzner, who was one of his associates at Harvard.
Yeah.
One of the three, him and Richard Albert.
Yeah.
They
Ramdas, yeah.
Ramdas, yeah.
Yeah.
They all got booted from Harvard because of their experimentation and so forth, which was ridiculous. But so I actually did meet all three of them briefly.
Cool.
Had that, and I got, I've got the original book they put out, The Psychedelic Experience.
Cool.
So I use that kind of as a guidebook, but of course it's all based on derivative Tibetan Buddhism.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So then, explored religions, and I dove into Sufism, and then I had the opportunity to study with a Sufi master for a couple of years, off and on, for, every couple of months he would be putting on retreats and workshops. That's how I got started in drumming, actually.
Sure.
I got my first percussion lessons from a Sufi master,
Sure.
and got my first doumbek. But, so I really began to immerse myself into mythology. Well, as a kid, I was fascinated by Greek mythology and Norse mythology.
Sure.
And, immersing myself into the whole, the Fenrir wolf and the Midgard serpent and, the Ragnarok. And blew my mind at 10 years old, like trying to envision that.
Yeah.
Of course, now, fast forward by 10, 15 years, I'm convinced that mythology is a vehicle.
Absolutely.
A vehicle.
Absolutely.
For care. And we use symbolism in science. It's a different type of symbolism, but all of the scientific concepts are encoded in a symbolical language.
Sure.
I came to believe that mythology was a symbolical language.
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you probably have some insight. You probably followed that same route of thinking.
Yeah, well, I don't think that one can, actually truly experience that other realm, right? The other world, psychedelics, without at least gaining a lot of interest in this type of thing and changing the way that they operate in the world. And it seems so apparent, especially with so much work that's coming out now, that psychedelics were not just a part of culture back in the day. They were an extraordinarily integral part.
Yes.
And all shamanism is the world's earliest religion, right? And shamanism comes from altered states of consciousness, and it makes sense that religious movements in general have come from these altered states of consciousness, and it makes sense that altered states of consciousness guided humanity for since our inception, and and then another, it's also we're talking about symbolism and stuff, this mushroom in particular, it's the mushroom in Mario, Alice in Wonderland. The Smurfs live under them. It's the mushroom emoji on your phone. It's arguably one of the most iconic symbols in the world. The red mushroom with white dots. And then there's we've done experiments too where we ask young kids to draw a mushroom, and sure they've probably seen it, in their TV shows and stuff, but they're always drawing a mushroom with dots on it. It might be purple, it might be green, it might be red, but it's always the Amanita Muscaria. And then it's so there's this symbolic narrative that's carried on for years and years and years. And then another fun point is in stories, the mushroom shows up when the story takes the turn from the ordinary to the extraordinary. And right now, it's starting to pop up again as humans are starting to awaken and see the fallacy of the world that we live in. And it's almost as if it's part of the evolving mythos that's guiding, humanity and been guiding humanity. And this new story is becoming extraordinary as it starts to come out into the public. And it's really, and Jack Herrera would say that the shifting in the book, basically he says that the second coming, not second coming of Christ, not a lot of the New Agers think it's Christ consciousness, and I can back that up 100%. But what he says is that it's psychedelics and Amanita coming back onto the world at large, which could spark that, existing partly in the other and existing, partly here, and integrating these concepts of love and higher level of thinking and compassion and sacred commerce or evolutionary capitalism.
Yeah.
I like that one. That's a good one. But yeah, and it just makes so much sense. And like, I mean, Graham Hancock talks about how, like, you know, the ayahuasca vines are like penetrating out from the jungle into the lands across the world. And it's same with this. The mycelial network is penetrating across the world and like coming to awaken people to this new potential. And a lot of the traditional psychedelics tap you into, you know, that other world where Amanita seems to, instead of, it's not like psychedelic in the traditional sense. You're not like having visions or anything like that, but what it does is it seems to anchor that other world into your physical body, and then it helps with a lot of, you know, physical things, anxiety. So, you know, a lot of people take it for anxiety or sleep, as you mentioned, but it seems to help integrate that extraordinary into the ordinary body. Not that our bodies aren't extraordinary, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And so it's a very unique mushroom in that regards. It's unlike anything else that's out there, and it functions very differently pharmacologically, experientially, but it seems to be almost where if the other medicines take you into the other world briefly and then bring you back, this almost seems to be the bridge that you can walk across to and stay in between, you know, the other world and this world.
Now, that is a very interesting metaphor.
Yeah.
Well, I look back, you know, and I look at 16-year-old me. I was a troublemaker. I was mad at the world. I hated school. I hung out with the wrong people. Then the 17-year-old me has a psychedelic experience, and like that, I'm flipped, like the search for God.
Yep.
And I'm thinking, okay, how many 17-year-olds suddenly decide to dedicate their life to the search for God?
Yep.
But it was that experience that triggered that. Now, I think I was prone because I was so immersed in, I had grown up in a rural environment, loved the outdoors, loved nature. I read a lot, so I had read a lot of mythology, mostly, you know, Greek and Norse, like I said, and always interested in fantasy and all of that. So it kind of prepped me, like I mentioned when we were driving today, you know, that I read a whole lot. But that year before that first experience, I read almost exclusively science fiction, which kind of bends your mind to, you know, embracing these larger concepts. And it sort of, and then seeing, you know, what at the time was one of the preeminent science fiction movies ever produced at that time, 2001, which really did. I remember walking out of the theater, the Cinerama round theater, because it was one of the big, you know, round screens, you know, where you're totally immersed, and thinking, God, I wonder if that's what psychedelics are like. And that's kind of when I made the decision, I'm going to try that, you know, because my friend had been like raving about it for, you know, over a year that he and I were best buddies, and so I finally thought, okay, I'm going to try it. And then when I did, it just completely altered my whole perception of the world, of the universe, my interactions with my fellow human beings. I mean, I went back. It was probably a Friday or Saturday night, you know, that we did this. I went back to, and it was fall of '68. I went back to high school. I was not the same person Monday as I was Friday.
Yep.
I'm like looking at everything different.
Yeah, you can't put that mask back on. You know?
No, but I didn't want to. I was like, wow, this has opened up vistas that I had never even imagined. Yeah. And I wanted more. I wanted to see more. And I did until, you know, things, you know, I was lucky because I was in a position where I had access to some, you know, good things, good stuff for a year and a half, and then, you know, it shifted and I didn't have that anymore, and I got scared of what was out there. I didn't want to get stuff off the street, but I always felt like I was right on the verge of like the next level. I had gone, actually summer of '69, I had gone on this camping trip in southwestern Minnesota, the beautiful rolling prairie. It was on a ridge. I can actually show you on a map. It's a topographic high, and you look to the west, and the prairie just rolls away into so far in the distance you almost can't even tell where where you know, earth meets sky. And as you look, you'll see like groves of trees. You'll see croplands. You'll see the farms out there. And you get this sense of perspective. And then where I was at was a bison reserve.
Cool.
So I'm just like completely like one with, looking, and of course looking to the west, you've got these huge weather systems like rolling in, and the clouds would part and the sun's rays would come down and illuminate the landscape. And it was like, I thought, this is heaven.
Yeah.
This is heaven. I expected any moment I was going to see angels descending from the clouds, and just I literally in a state of total ecstasy at the perfection of creation. And then what happened was this huge storm rolls in, and I'm watching this thing come in over the western horizon, and the power of it was just overwhelming. And as I'm sitting there, this bison herd that had been kind of far off in the distance, just little black lumps, I didn't even know they were bison in my state of mind, they are hurrying back. As they're going back, it's near the Pipestone River. Okay. Pipestone River was where the Plains Indians quarried the clay stone that they carved into their ceremonial pipes. And it was considered to be so sacred that even warring tribes respected the sanctity of that. So that probably had something to do with it, that I'm sitting right. But as this buffalo herd is coming by, it's like I was like seeing them coming, these big looming shapes getting larger and larger, and the clouds building up behind them. And they were hurrying to get down by the river valley to get shelter. But literally I'm sitting there, and this buffalo herd is just, they weren't paying any attention to me. I'm just sitting there, and they're walking by. I could have reached out and petted them as they walked by.
Cool.
But I had this very distinct impression that there were the spirits of the native peoples embodied in these beasts.
In the buffalo?
In the buffalo,
cool.
Yes. I don't know how to explain it, but that's...
I can understand that,
yeah. I'm sure you can. Yeah. They hurried by, and then, probably 20 minutes later, all hell broke loose.
The weather.
The weather. And so I'm sitting there, and I'm looking out over the prairie, and I see these huge lightning bolts coming down. First one, I guess that was affecting the ozone or something. I don't know, but then another one, and then another one, and pretty soon I could see like 3 or 4 huge lightning bolts coming down at any given moment. And then it started hailing, and I thought, you know what? I probably better get in shelter.
Yeah, probably.
So I turned around, went back, and me and Rowan, my brother, he was there, my best friend from high school and his brother and our other brother. So we had driven out in this big black panel truck, driven from that morning from Minneapolis down to southwestern Minnesota, and then had to take shelter in Oh, and as I'm coming back, the weather front hits, and they had been setting up. Well, I'm over there in this state of reverie. They're back there setting up the tent. Right, we had a big tent. It was like sleep 8 people or something. Just as I'm coming back, the wind comes in, and they're struggling to hold down the tent. It just gets ripped out of their hands, and I watch the tent just disappear up into the sky. Fun. So took refuge in the truck.
Yeah.
And looking out the window at this whole, just the power of nature was what it was about. And so finally, the night is over. We're all kind of coming down here in that post state. Yeah. I get out and I walk down by the river, and there was sitting on an outcrop there right next to the river, maybe 3 feet off of the water level, and it's this heavy mist hanging over the water. And I hear this little tinkling, something moving in the water, and I'm listening, and I can hear it. It kind of gets a little louder, and then gets a little louder, and then I see this shape moving in the mist, and the mist was really thick. You couldn't see the water.
Sure.
And I see it going back and forth, and it was like moving in a zigzag pattern, and every zig or zag, it was coming closer and closer. And what am I seeing? Trying to make out what it was, and then it finally comes up. Right there, I'm sitting right up on the edge of the rock, and it's this huge pelican.
Oh, wow.
Comes right up and stops for about a full minute. It is sitting there, and we're just looking at each other, this pelican. And then the pelican kind of turns around and swims off. And I thought...
It knew, you know?
What?
It knew. It knew.
No, it really did seem like it. It seemed like, well, first it was the buffalo, and then now this pelican is like, you know, checking on me. You came out to this, you know, later I discovered, you know, a lot of significance to the symbolism of the pelican.
Sure, yeah.
And then I walked back up, and I'm walking up the gravel road. We were the only ones there in the campground at the time. Here comes a ranger truck, and he stops, and I didn't expect to see anybody here, and said, well, we weathered it out, and you know, we could see the panel truck there and stuff. And I asked him about it. He said, so well, this is the strongest storm we've had in 10 years.
Wow.
And I thought, and I've always looked back on that, and I thought, strongest storm in 10 years. And there we were. I was tripping, peaking in the midst of that.
Yeah, the craziest things happen when you're on psychedelics, too. You just, like, synchronistically attract intense experiences or crazy experiences.
This was an intense, and I ranked this right of probably the 2 or 3 peak experiences of my life was that 6-7 hours looking out there. And I thought, you know, I want to repeat that experience. Of course, it never happened.
Yeah, we can repeat it.
Oh, okay.
How do you feel, man?
I'm feeling good.
Yeah?
Yeah, I'm feeling good.
A little flowy. What would you... So, instead of it coming from me, which I'm happy to extrapolate, but what would you do? So I think this is the largest dose you've ever taken, because you've only taken 1 capsule in the past, correct?
At one time.
Yeah, at one time. So, one capsule is a half gram. I would say generally a half gram to a gram or 2 is like a microdose. You probably took right about 2 grams. So you're like right on the edge of like a microdose to a low dose, which is where you should actually start to feel it a little bit more. Not that you don't necessarily feel a microdose, but yeah, how do you feel?
Feel good.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm feeling relaxed, mellow, you know, kind of like in tune with things. And I kind of deliberately held off of that. Well, Christian's coming here, you know, next week. I think I'll wait till he gets here and, you know, be in his presence. When
I tend to amplify for people, too.
Yeah. So, it's great. I'm looking forward to learning more, experiencing and learning more. And we should mention, you've got an awesome website.
Yeah.
And very informative.
Yeah, thank you.
And the videos, Gabriel
is amazing.
He is amazing, yeah. So I'd like to encourage people to go check out your website. And, you know, there was a lot of sort of technical information and so on. You'll find all the, the definitions and the meanings. You'll be able to work your way through it.
Yeah.
But it's a very well done, informative website.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so important because there's such a... I explain like preparation and dosing and all these things. Like it's a bridge for people to cross to be able to actually use it responsibly and properly.
Use it responsibly. Yeah. That was the thing. And this is the thing that got sabotaged with the drug war.
Sure.
Is it pushed it out onto the streets.
Sure. Yeah.
You know? Yep. And there were bad trips because you had stuff that was not pure, right. People overdosing the first time because nobody said, look, start out with about 100 or 200 micrograms, not 1,000 micrograms,
Yeah.
But hopefully now we can make up for lost time.
Yeah, I think so. I think we're entering into that era for sure. Yeah.
Good.
And we'll do whatever we can to be a part of that. And yeah, I mean, the website, any information that anybody could ever want to start is on the website. And then the further information tends to get divulged in sit-downs like this and long-form discussions.
Yes. So we'll have a link for people to go to the website. And I think that, we should plan a follow-up at some point.
Please.
And if you come back, I don't know if we mentioned this, but we're both from Minnesota and we both grew up in canoes. And I have three canoe. Actually, my brother has them up at his house next door, and one of them is a whitewater canoe, not flat water.
Yeah,
but Yeah. I'll just mention, I did so much canoeing as a kid growing up, and then I competed in a few canoe racing marathons in my early 20s. But when I was studying meditation and yoga and breathing exercises, what I would do is we moved up to north of Brainerd. We bought 8 acres of land on a lake up there, and I would go out in the canoe and I would do my breathing exercises coordinated with my paddling.
Yeah, for sure.
And that was really, really, really nice. And I would be doing my mantra and my breathing while I'm paddling.
Yeah, yoga on the water.
Yoga on the water, that's right. And I was thinking of a Chinese, what was it saying about wind on the water out of the Tao Te Ching? That's what it was like to me.
Sure.
And then, of course, that was flat water. And then when you're paddling on a river, now you're really you have to become one with the current.
Yep.
And the wind, and it is very meditative. And I haven't been canoeing in probably 12 to 15 years.
Oh, we're gonna go.
We're gonna go. We're gonna go. We're gonna do this
For
thing.
sure.
Maybe we'll even bring Trent.
Me, I don't know, man. I don't know.
You ever been in a canoe, Trent?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you have?
Water rafting. I've been in canoes.
Okay.
All that stuff, yeah.
But see, what you probably haven't done is, there is a whole method for canoeing.
Oh,
Especially when you have, you don't just randomly do this.
I see. Okay.
It's not just, there's more to it, Trent.
Are you going to tell me at some point?
Yeah, I'm going to train, and I'm thinking when we get to school, not hopefully, we've got to have water nearby.
Yeah.
Because, to me, the whole experience, is so meditative. And when you got 2 paddlers, you got a person in the bow, in the front of the canoe, one in the stern, you each have a different role to play. You each have a different role to play, and you learn how, of course, when you're particularly moving water, the one thing you're trying to avoid is having the keel of the canoe. You want to keep it parallel to the current. You don't want this to happen, because when this happens, then this happens, and then you're in the water.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fun, too.
Yeah. Which, can be fun under some circumstances, but
Anything come to mind that you feel like you weren't able to cover there?
I mean, I think it makes sense for us to do a second one, because we haven't even the discussion that we could get into would be another hour or two to talk about like really what's going on in consciousness when somebody starts utilizing this mushroom. That's a long discussion, and it makes sense if we're going to do another one of these. I think it actually makes sense to do it on the second one. We'll get more traction. We'll all get more traction if we do it that way. So I think that's smart and makes sense. But yeah.
well, I really hope you come back soon, and we'll do some of this stuff. I'm always willing to have a remote discussion.
Sure. Yeah,
we can do that.
I'd like to come in person. That'd be cool.
In person is preferable, but
Yeah.
if it gets complicated for you to get back or whatever,
Sure.
maybe it isn't. But
well,
I'm always.
If you're in LA too in October, like we could set up there at my place, and that's a possibility too.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a possibility. So.
Okay.
Yeah, whatever works. We'll stay in touch. And
Sure.
I'm so grateful for both of you guys. Seriously, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate this. And the mushroom is grateful too. And the mushroom works through me, so we're symbiotically grateful for this whole ordeal. So
well, I'm going to be in touch, because as I get into experimenting, I'm sure I'm going to have questions and things I want to, clarification on. And when I decide to up the ante a little bit,
I would say so. So we talked about the decarboxylation. These are non-decarb. They're just dried. This goes through a decarb process, so it's similar to if you make the tea. So there's more muscimol and less ibotenic acid in this one. So it might have a little bit of a different experience. So it might be fun to try 1 or 2 of these first and hit a similar dose to what you've done in the past. And then I would say give like 5 or 6 of either of these a shot. And do it in the evening, and it's not, you more than likely, you could probably drive, you're not going to be like super intoxicated or anything, but you'll get a little bit more of what I'm speaking to here, and that'll be probably important for the next part of the conversation.
Okay.
Because you start to, you're able to see things kind of like how you see the mask on people, you're able to see things but in a super unique way that's completely unto Amanita, and it's almost like I guess it's a different form of gnosis, right, or just like knowledge without having to experiential knowledge. And I'm really curious. You have a beautiful mind, and I'm curious how your mind interprets that gnosis specifically. So we can prelude the next talk with some of that, and yeah, let me know how it goes, and we'll walk you through everything, and and then at some point, maybe next time I'm out here, we brew up this whole bag and split it in a cup of tea and take it a little bit further, but we'll see.
The Psychedelic Podcast with Randall Carlson.
Well, we could dose ourselves with this and head out in the canoe.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, so I mean, well, let's start with Blue Lotus, since we didn't get to really cover that much. So we offer, so there's the flowers, which is what the Egyptians would use. They would actually mix them into wine. So there's two main compounds in lotus. One's water soluble, the other is ethanol soluble. So when you make a tea out of it, you're only getting the water soluble compound. The ethanol stays in the flower. But when you brew it into wine, you get an extract of both of them. We have an extract that's a water ethanol extract, and then we infuse that extract into gummies. So each gummy is about the equivalent of 3 grams of flower, or 1 or 2 of the full flower buds. So you can get much more, you can consume much more and have both of the alkaloids in it and actually get more of an experience. Otherwise you kind of need to eat, like in the Odyssey, they're eating lotus flowers. Like you got to eat quite a bit of them to actually get more of the effects. Do you remember how many you took of those for the lotus gummies at a time?
The blue 2.
2. Yeah, cool. And that's a great starting dose for a lot of people. My sweet spot's like 3 or 4 or 5, and it has this empathogenic, heart opening, floaty, dreamy feel to it. It's relatively subtle, but it's very nice, and it seems to have like a plateau. So like 10 gummies isn't twice as strong as 5 gummies. It kind of teeters out at some point. But yeah, it's one of the cool things that we learned early on was that we had a customer come to us that said that they started microdosing the gummies. So they would take 1 gummy 3 times a day for weeks, and they said by the end of like 2 or 3 weeks their heart chakra opened up, and it was as if they had a full-blown like kundalini heart opening activation.
Wow.
And so we tested this out with a lot of customers, and pretty reliably, that was an extreme example, but pretty reliably people state that they're more loving and more compassionate at the end of their microdosing regimen, which is cool. We need more love.
We need more of that.
Yeah.
Oh my God, do we need more of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Lotus is amazing. The flowers can be great for tea, and some people smoke them, but the gummies are really fire. Nobody else in the world is doing that like we are. So yeah, those are really great. The Kana, as I mentioned, it's a potent mood lift. It increases serotonin in the body and brain. The gummies are a great place to start for that. Generally, 1 gummy is a good dose, and I definitely recommend you try that at some point, and try it during the day, because it can not necessarily stimulating, but it might keep you up a little bit. But just 1 gummy is enough. Some people will go to 2 gummies, but pretty reliably 3 gummies is overdoing it for most people.
So
keep it at 1 or 2. And overdoing it is like, it just you can get a little rushy, I guess it feels. You can just get a little uncomfortable, It's not like it's going to be like a horrific experience or anything, but it can just get uncomfortable. And then, so for Amanita, what we've been discussing basically this whole time, the dosing table is, it's all over the website. So if anybody's interested, they can go on the website and find all the info that they'll need. But for now, the dosing table is essentially 0.5 grams, so half a gram, which is 1 capsule, to roughly 2 grams is a microdose. And then we just took around 2 grams each. So 2 to 5 grams is where you get into like the low dose territory. That's when you start feeling it a little bit more. You're a little bit more relaxed. Your mood gets lifted, a little bit more in a flow state. You kind of can start pulling threads that you maybe wouldn't be pulling otherwise. And 5 to 10 grams, and once one gets to this level, it's generally good to not take capsules or just eat the raw mushroom cap, because that can cause stomach upset. So the gummies or brewing a tea, and that is what we call a medium dose. That's what we're going to experiment with later down the road, because you really start to get into the Amanita dream world, we'll say, and you're really able to see things like in a different perspective. I come from the world of healing and self-optimization, right? and like everybody that I'm involved with in Los Angeles is like in this realm, and I'm able to get, if I have something that I'm like, I don't like how I'm like doing this around my partner, or, like acting in this certain way, or reacting in this certain way, I could use psilocybin, I could use, mescaline or any other psychedelic. Amanita will allow me to get the most effective, quickest, most efficient work done on altering my personality structure and becoming the individual that I want to be. And that happens, very reliably for me if I'm actually putting the work in at that like 5 to 10 gram range. After 10 grams, it gets a little bit more strange, we'll say, and it's still a beautiful experience, but this is where most people are not even going to consider venturing into, and it gets a little bit more intense, but it's still relatively manageable. 15 grams plus is generally considered the heroic dose territory, and it's a whole different experience that's unlike anything else, and it's very hard to put into words, but most anybody should have, at least for their first couple times, somebody there with them if they're doing that, because it can be confusing, and people can, you can get stuck in time loops, and there's very interesting like physical alterations of reality that are happening in a very unique way onto the mushroom. But yeah, so people should be careful, and most everybody should not even venture there. But that's the typical dosing table. Most everybody really enjoys microdose to medium dose, maybe up to 7, 8, 9 grams, and then after that it's just a select few that should really be playing around with it. But yeah, that's the general rundown. The website's chock full of any information, and then you got me, so just hit me up. If
Okay.
you want to talk about any
Got
of
the
this.
man himself when I have questions.
Yeah.
And okay, I love it. Well, this has been great. I think that we've covered enough for the one episode. So Christian,
Hey, thank you, brother.
Hey.
I really appreciate it.
me
man.
too.
Seriously.
Me too. I appreciate
It's
you,
been a lot
man.
of fun.
All right,
I'm excited to come back.
good. Excited to have you back.
Yeah, cool. Sweet. Thank you, man.